Okay, here is lesson 13, populations, samples, and generalizing from a sample to a population. You're going to need to have internet access. Obviously, you already have that in order to view this video, but you're going to need to look up some things and also have a calculator handy for the census work. So this lesson continues focusing on using data to answer a statistical question. Remember that a statistical question is one that can be answered by collecting data and where there will be variability in that data. In this lesson, we plan to collect sample data from a population to answer a statistical question. Thus, this lesson begins the development of our thinking about how to select a sample. What does the sample tell us about the population? Is the sample representative of the population? How likely is it that the summary values calculated from the sample also reflect the population? These are big ideas that are first encountered in this grade level and developed further in later grade levels. All right, let's take a look at exercises 1 through 4. First, we're going to start with exercise 1. Data are used to find answers to questions or to make decisions. People collect data in many different ways for many different reasons. We need to answer the questions as if we have no other source available. We could not go to the internet and ask for the average home cost, for example. We would have to figure out how to get enough information to estimate an average cost. So let's remember, a population is the entire set of objects, whether it be people, animals, plants, etc., from which data might be collected. And a sample is a subset of that population. So when you tackle data problems, it is helpful to identify the population and if there is a sample by putting them in a chart. Something similar to this. Population might be a pot of soup, and a sample would be a teaspoon of that soup. Population could be all batteries of a certain brand, and a sample could be the group of batteries put in flashlights and timed to determine how long they last. So let's go through exercise 1. How might you collect data to answer the question, does the soup taste good? Well, you could taste a teaspoon of the soup to check the seasoning. How might you collect data to answer the question, how many movies do students in your class see in a month? Well, you could ask the students to write down how many movies they have seen that month and collect their responses. So how might you collect data to answer the question, what is the median price of a home in our town? Remember, you can't use the internet. Well, you can find the price of homes listed in the newspaper, and you can use that data to estimate the median price. Or another option is you could go to a realty office and get the prices for homes that they have listed for sale. How might you collect data to answer the question, how many pets do people own in my neighborhood? Well, your answers might vary depending on where you live. If you live in an urban area with high-rise apartment buildings, might ask some people on each floor of the building, unless it is not a pet-friendly building, or people as they go to work in the morning. Those living in suburban or rural areas might go door to door and ask their neighbors. So how might you collect data to answer the question, what is the typical number of absences in math classes at your school on a given day? Well, you could ask each math teacher how many students were absent in each of his or her math classes for a given day. How might you collect data to answer the question, what is the typical lifespan of a particular brand of flashlight battery? Well, you could always put some batteries in flashlights and time how long they last. How might you collect data to answer the question, what percentage of girls and of boys in your school have a curfew? Well, you could ask all the students if they have a curfew. But what if you have a large school? Well, you can identify a random sample of students to ask. So how might you collect data to answer the question, what is the most common blood type of students in my class? Well, you could always look at the medical data for each student. Remember that numerical summary values calculated using data from an entire population are called population characteristics. Numerical summary values calculated using data from a sample are called statistics. All right, answer exercises 2 and 3 using the information from exercise 1. For which of the scenarios in exercise 1 did you describe collecting data from a population and which from a sample? Well, data on the soup seasoning, median home cost, number of pets, and battery life might be collected from a sample. Data on the average number of movies, number of absent from math classes, and most common blood types might be collected from a population. Think about collecting data in the scenarios above. Give at least 2 reasons you might want to collect data from a sample rather than from the entire population. Well, if you use the whole population, you might use it all up, like in the soup and the batteries example. In some cases, a sample can give you all the information you need. For instance, you only need a sample of soup to see that the seasoning of the soup in the pot is good because it is the same all the way through. Sometimes it is too hard to collect the data for an entire population. It might cost too much or take too long to ask everyone in a population. So let's look at exercise 4. Make up a result you might get in response to the situations in exercise 1 and identify whether the result would be based on a population characteristic or a sample statistic. So again, as these answers are revealed, remember that these are all made up. So you obviously will probably not have something similar to what is in these answers, but yours should be something similar. So A, does the soup taste good? Yes, but it needs more salt. The spoonful sample would be similar to a statistic, although it is not really a statistic. It is based on a sample, so in that way it is like a statistic. How many movies do your classmates see in a month? Well, the mean number of movies was 5. Again, that is made up. And that would be a population characteristic if you asked everyone in your class. What is the median price of a home in our town? $150,000, and that would be a sample statistic because obviously you can't find all the prices of the houses in town, especially in Phoenix. It just would be impossible to figure that out. How many pets do people in my neighborhood own? Well, an answer could be 1 pet. And this could either be a population characteristic or a sample statistic depending on what method you use to collect the data. What is the typical number of absences in math classes at your school on a given day? Well, you could say 4 absences, which could be a mean or a median representing a typical, and that would be population characteristic if you asked all the math teachers at your school. What is the typical lifespan of a particular brand of flashlight batteries? Again, something made up. Could be 54 hours, but again, you couldn't test all of the flashlight batteries, so this would be a sample statistic. What percentage of girls and of boys in your school have a curfew? Well, again, you could say 65% of the girls and 58% of the boys have a curfew, and that could either be a population characteristic or a sample statistic depending on the method of collecting data and how many kids you have in your school. What is the most common blood type of my classmates? Well, you could pick something like O positive is the most common, with 42% of the class having O positive. The class is a population, so the 42% would be a population characteristic. It could be possible to think of the class as a sample of all 7th graders, and then it would be a sample statistic. So if you only did one class and not the whole 7th grade, then that would be a sample. All right, let's take a look at exercise 5. Answer the questions for exercise 5, checking each one as you go by continuing the video. All right, you should be done with the first part of the exercise. And check your answer. All right, let's take a look at exercises 6 through 8. For these exercises, we are going to go through these one at a time since we will tailor the information for Arizona instead of New York. So for number 6, when data are collected from an entire population, it is called a census. The United States takes a census of its population every 10 years, with the most recent one occurring in 2010. To find the history of the U.S. Census, you could go to this website. You copy it down, pause the video, open up a new tab, and check out the history of the U.S. Census. It's not a long article. So for part A, identify 3 things that you found to be interesting. All right, once you've identified those, let's look at part B. Why is the census important in the United States? All right, next we're going to go to this next website, and this is the actual census. So again, pause the video and open up a new tab. You might need to go back and forth between the video and your tab in order to do this. In the upper left-hand corner where it asks to select the state, go ahead and choose Arizona. Now we're going to answer questions A through C using the information for Arizona. So for part A, you should have 6,392,017 people live in Arizona. For part B, there are 881,831 people, 65 and older, and 1,629,014 people who are 18 under, which estimates to 8.8 and 16.2. It is important because when there are a greater number of older people than younger people, there will be fewer workers than people who have to be supported. For part C, the ratio is a population characteristic because it is based on the data from the entire population of Arizona. All right, question 8. The American Community Survey, ACS, takes samples from a small percentage of the U.S. population in years between the censuses. And here is the website for that. Let's go ahead and pause the video. Copy this down and go to it. So for part A, What is the difference between the way the ACS collects information about the U.S. population and the way the U.S. Census Bureau collects information? Well, the ACS obtains its result from a small percentage of the U.S. population, while the Census Bureau attempts to obtain its results from the entire population. Part B. In 2011, the ACS sampled workers living in Arizona about commuting to work each day. Why do you think these data are important for the state to know? And here is the website to go to that. You will need to scroll down to commuting to work. So in order to plan for the best ways to travel, communities need to know how many people are using the roads, which roads, whether they travel by public transportation, and so on. Part C. Suppose that from a sample of 200,000 Arizona workers, 32,400 reported traveling more than 25 minutes to work each day. From this information, statisticians determined that between 16% and 16.4% of the workers in the state traveled more than 25 minutes to work every day in 2011. If there were 15,667,237 workers in the entire population, about how many traveled more than 25 minutes to work each day? Well, that would be between about 2,506,758 and 2,569,427 people. For Part D, reasoning from a sample to the population is called making an inference about a population characteristic. Identify the statistic involved in making the inference in Part C. Well, that sample statistic is 32,400 over 200,000, or about 16.2%. For Part E, the data about traveling time to work suggests that across the United States, typically between 79.8% and 80% of commuters travel alone, 10% to 10.2% carpool, and 4.9% to 5.1% use public transportation. Survey your classmates to find out how a worker and their family gets to work. How do the results compare to the national data, and what might explain any differences? All right, let's go ahead and wrap this up. So describe 2 examples that you have read about or experienced where data were collected from a population, and 2 examples where data were collected from a sample drawn from a population. Well, data collected from a population could be grades on a test in class or the amount of taxes paid on homes in a given area. Data collected from a sample could be polls about an election or studies of certain kinds of new medicines or treatments. What does it mean to make an inference in statistics? Well, you get information from a sample and draw conclusions from that information as to what the sample or what the same information might be for the whole population. The focus of this lesson was on collecting information either from a population, which is an entire set of elements in a group of interest, or a subset of the population called a sample. One example of data collected from a population is the U.S. Census, which collects data from every person in the United States every 10 years. The Census Bureau also samples the population to study things that affect the economy and living conditions of people in the United States in more detail. When data from a population are used to calculate a numerical summary, the values of is called the population characteristic. When data from a sample are used to calculate a numerical summary, the value is called a sample statistic. Sample statistics can be used to learn about population characteristics. All right, we'll see you in class.